My family called me a Navy dropout. Then a general said, "Colonel, you're here." My dad's jaw dropped. Growing up in our house felt less like a home and more like a carefully regimented military base, a sentiment that wasn't far from the truth considering my father was a retired Navy captain. Every aspect of our lives, from the perfectly made beds to the rigidly scheduled mealtimes, was infused with a sense of order, precision, and an almost militant adherence to discipline. Excellence wasn't just encouraged, it was a non-negotiable expectation, particularly when it came to anything resembling a challenge. Academic achievements were met with a brisk nod, athletic victories with a terse, "good work," but any deviation from the path of exemplary performance was met with swift, silent disapproval that felt heavier than any shouted reprimand. My brother, Jack, was the quintessential golden boy in this environment. He possessed an innate athleticism, a sharp, analytical mind, and a natural inclination towards structured activities that endeared him instantly to our father. Jack excelled at everything he touched, from mastering complex chess strategies to dominating the local swim meets. My father's praise for him was effusive, frequent, and utterly unambiguous. "That's my boy," he'd declare, a proud gleam in his eye, watching Jack execute a perfect dive or articulate a flawless argument. Jack was destined for greatness, molded in the captain's own image, a testament to the family's unwavering commitment to military precision, even if it was applied to civilian life. He was everything my father admired, everything he believed a child should be: focused, driven, and impeccably disciplined. And then there was me. I was different. While Jack thrived under the rigid structure, I chafed against it, my spirit inherently more whimsical, more inclined towards creativity and spontaneous thought than rigid adherence to a timetable. I loved to draw, to write stories, to wander through the woods for hours, lost in my own imagination. These pursuits, however, were seen not as burgeoning talents, but as distractions, evidence of a fundamental flaw in my character. My efforts, no matter how earnest, were always met with a critical eye, a comparison to Jack's unwavering focus, a subtle shake of my father's head. His favorite, oft-repeated phrase, delivered with a sigh of weary disappointment, was that I lacked discipline. It wasn't just a casual observation. It was a pronouncement, a fundamental diagnosis of my inadequacy, a constant reminder that I didn't fit the mold, that I was somehow falling short of the unspoken military standard that permeated our home. That phrase, "lacked discipline," became a branding iron on my soul, shaping my self-perception, whispering doubts into every endeavor, and fostering a deep-seated ache for a form of approval I knew, instinctively, I would never truly receive from the man who commanded our household with the precision of a naval officer. Despite the constant shadow of my father's disapproval, a perverse part of me still craved his elusive commendation, a desire that ultimately led me to the gates of the Naval Academy. It was a predictable path, the obvious choice for someone raised in our household, a tacit agreement to conform, to prove that I could, in fact, embody the discipline he so valued. The initial years were grueling, a relentless test of endurance, both physical and mental, but I pushed through, driven by a stubborn desire to succeed on his terms. I endured the early mornings, the rigorous training, the demanding academic load, each passing day a small, silent victory against the label of lacked discipline. I excelled in my studies, my mind finding an unexpected kinship with the complex strategies and historical naval battles, even if my heart wasn't entirely in the parade ground drills. Then, in the spring of my third year, everything changed with the quiet summons to a nondescript office, tucked away in a seldom-used corner of the campus. The man who met me there was not a professor, nor a commanding officer I recognized, but a civilian, his eyes sharp and assessing. He spoke in low, measured tones, his words like carefully placed chess pieces. He offered me a place in a secret program, an opportunity he described as unique, demanding, and vital to national security. The details were sparse, shrouded in layers of classification, but the implications were immense. It required immediate transfer, a complete severance from my current path, and absolute, unwavering secrecy. The terms were non-negotiable. I would disappear from the Naval Academy roster, my enrollment status vanishing as if I had never been there. My official record, the one accessible to the public and, more importantly, to my family, would simply state that I had dropped out of the academy. This cover story, a sudden, inexplicable failure, would be the only explanation anyone, especially my father, would ever receive. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, I had striven to prove my discipline, to overcome his constant critiques, and now, my greatest act of service, my true demonstration of commitment, would be perceived as the ultimate failure in his eyes. It was a bitter pill to swallow, knowing that this clandestine path, born of an unexpected aptitude they had identified in me, would condemn me to his permanent disappointment, confirming every negative judgment he had ever held. But the challenge, the sheer weight of the mission hinted at in their hushed tones, was irresistible. It spoke to a part of me that craved purpose beyond the rigid confines of my childhood, a chance to truly prove myself, even if no one would ever know. I accepted, the decision made in a single, silent heartbeat, stepping into a shadow world where my existence would be a secret, and my familial ties, already strained, would be stretched to their absolute breaking point. The moment I informed my parents about my supposed dropout from the Naval Academy, the air in our home became thick with a familiar disappointment, heavier than any silence. My mother's face crumpled, a mixture of sadness and what looked suspiciously like embarrassment. My father, however, reacted with a chilling stillness. He didn't yell, didn't demand explanations, didn't even express anger in the way I half expected. Instead, he simply stopped mentioning me. It was a calculated erasure, a deliberate act of parental disownment far more painful than any reprimand. My name, once a topic of constant critique and comparison, simply vanished from his vocabulary, as if my brief foray into a life of discipline had been nothing more than a fleeting, regrettable dream. Family lunches, once tense affairs centered around my supposed failings, now revolved exclusively around Jack's soaring achievements. He was truly flourishing, excelling in his own chosen field, each triumph meticulously recounted by my parents with beaming pride. Jack just closed that big deal, my mother would gush, her eyes shining. He's being considered for partner already, my father would add, his voice resonant with satisfaction. Their admiration for him was a tangible thing, a warm, bright light that filled the room, casting me into an even deeper shadow. I would sit there, stirring my food, listening to the glowing reports of Jack's latest victories, feeling like a ghost at my own family's table. When the conversation inevitably circled back to me, which was rare and usually prompted by some distant relative, I would offer my carefully constructed cover story. I was doing administrative work at an insurance company. The words felt bland, uninspired, a pale reflection of the intense, secret world I now inhabited. My parents would offer a perfunctory nod, their expressions blank, clearly uninterested in the mundane details of my fictional life. There were no follow-up questions, no genuine curiosity, just a quick change of subject back to Jack, or the weather, or anything else that would divert attention from my perceived failure. The irony was a bitter taste in my mouth. I was engaged in work that demanded the utmost discipline, precision, and secrecy, tasks that were vital and complex beyond their comprehension. Yet, in their eyes, I was merely the daughter who lacked discipline, who had dropped out, relegated to a dull, insignificant existence. The silence surrounding my true life, the one I had chosen to serve a higher purpose, became a heavy cloak, insulating me from their judgment, but also from any hope of their understanding or approval. It was a lonely existence, living a double life where my greatest efforts were met with their deepest disappointment. My career, hidden beneath the mundane facade of administrative work, was anything but. While my family envisioned me shuffling papers in a cubicle, I was operating in the shadows, navigating a world of high stakes and critical missions. My days, and often my nights, were consumed by complex intelligence gathering, intricate surveillance, and the relentless pursuit of information that literally saved lives. The training was relentless, the pressure immense, but I thrived on it, discovering a deep well of resilience and an innate aptitude for strategic thinking that even surprised me. I conducted delicate night operations under the cloak of darkness, my senses heightened, my movements precise. Each piece of intelligence I uncovered, each critical detail I pieced together, contributed to preventing attacks, dismantling threats, and protecting countless innocent people I would never know. I received commendations, quiet nods of appreciation from those in my clandestine world, and even discreet awards that, by their very nature, could never be displayed. Each commendation was a silent validation, a testament to the discipline and dedication my father believed I lacked. Yet, despite this rapid, demanding, and profoundly impactful development in my secret life, to my family, I remained frozen in their initial judgment. When I visited, the conversations were still dominated by Jack's latest corporate triumphs, his steady ascent in a world they understood and approved of. My parents would offer vague, pitying smiles, their eyes holding that familiar disappointment. I was still the one who just didn't try hard enough, the child who had squandered her potential by dropping out of the academy. There was no curiosity about my office job, no probing questions, just a comfortable, almost deliberate, ignorance. Even Jack, whose bond with me had once been a source of comfort, drifted further away, the chasm between our lives growing wider with each passing year. He'd occasionally make polite conversation, but his questions were always superficial, laced with an unintentional condescension that stung. So, "How's the office job treating you?" He'd ask, his tone casual, almost dismissive, as if the notion of my professional life being anything more than mundane cubicle existence was beyond comprehension. His polite inquiries felt less like genuine interest and more like an obligation, a quick check-in before he returned to the weighty discussions of his own impressive career. The gap between my public perception and my private reality became an unbridgeable canyon, a profound isolation born of necessary secrecy and ingrained family judgment. I was saving lives, but in their eyes, I was merely existing, a shadow of the person they wished I had been. My double life became my new normal, a carefully choreographed dance between the shadows and the mundane. The private world, the one known only to a select few, hummed with purpose and relentless challenge. My career wasn't just developing rapidly, it was soaring. At the age of 34, I was promoted to colonel, a rank that carried immense responsibility and trust within the clandestine operations I was part of. My days were a whirlwind of tactical planning, briefing sessions that could alter the course of global events, and the execution of high-stakes missions. I conducted operations in dozens of countries, navigating complex geopolitical landscapes, my decisions often meaning the difference between life and death for countless individuals. Each successful mission, each piece of intelligence that prevented a catastrophe, was a quiet triumph, a profound validation of the path I had chosen. I was a quiet force, an unseen protector, contributing to something far greater than myself. Yet, when I returned home, stepping back into the familiar confines of my family's orbit, I effortlessly slipped back into the well-worn costume of Samantha the Failure. The contrast was stark, almost comical in its absurdity. At family gatherings, over forced smiles and polite inquiries, I skillfully dodged any questions about my work. "Oh, the office job is fine," I'd say, a practiced shrug in my shoulders. "Just a lot of paperwork, you know." My voice would be light, dismissive, designed to discourage any further probing. I became an expert at vague answers, at redirecting conversations, at making my civilian life sound as dull and unremarkable as possible. There were moments, fleeting glimpses, when I wanted to scream the truth, to show them the commendations, to tell them about the lives I had saved, about the courage and discipline it took to operate in the shadows. But the rules of my secret program were absolute, and the ingrained fear of their judgment, their inevitable dismissal of anything that didn't fit their narrow definition of success, kept my lips sealed. My parents still spoke of Jack with boundless pride, his name a constant refrain in their conversations, while my existence remained a quiet, almost forgotten footnote. Jack would occasionally ask about my office job, his tone still tinged with that familiar, almost pitying politeness. He meant no harm, I knew, but his casual inquiries, so far removed from the reality of my life, only highlighted the insurmountable gap that had formed between us. I was a colonel, a guardian, a quiet hero in a world they couldn't conceive of, but in the only world that seemed to matter to them, I was still just Samantha, the one who didn't quite measure up, the one who had dropped out, living a seemingly unremarkable life, always falling short of their military-grade expectations. The weight of this hidden life was heavy, a constant reminder of the profound disconnect between who I truly was and who they believed me to be. Thanksgiving Day, a holiday meant for warmth and gratitude, often felt more like an annual performance review in our household. The centerpiece wasn't the turkey, but Jack's latest triumph, carved and served with generous portions of parental pride. This year was no exception. I was present, physically, sitting at the polished dining room table, but my mind was a million miles away, grappling with the echoes of a high-stakes mission I'd just concluded. My cover story for missing past family events due to work had grown thin, but they rarely pressed, content with their established narrative of my unremarkable life. The dinner conversation, as always, flowed predictably towards Jack. My father, robust and beaming, cleared his throat, commanding the room's attention like a seasoned orator. "I have an announcement," he boomed, his voice resonating with a profound satisfaction that seemed to fill every corner of the room. "Our Jack, he's been accepted into the elite Special Forces training program." A ripple of excited murmurs went through the assembled relatives. Jack, looking suitably humble but undeniably pleased, received a chorus of congratulations and slaps on the back. My father's chest visibly swelled with pride, his gaze fixed on his golden son, a picture of ultimate achievement and familial vindication. My mother, seated beside him, leaned in, her eyes shining with an almost conspiratorial delight. She reached over, squeezing my father's arm, and whispered, loud enough for me and several others at our end of the table to hear, "At least one of our children makes us proud." The words, delivered with a soft, saccharine tone, were a precise, targeted dagger, aimed directly at my heart. It was a familiar refrain, a quiet acknowledgement of my perceived failure, a stark contrast to the effusive praise heaped upon Jack. In that moment, surrounded by the clinking of silverware and the buzz of admiration for my brother, the weight of their judgment pressed down on me, heavy and suffocating. They had no idea. As they celebrated Jack's entry into an elite military program, believing it to be the pinnacle of service and dedication, I had just spent the previous 72 hours at work, deeply embroiled in preventing a major breach of NATO security. I had been operating without sleep, my senses stretched to their limits, navigating complex digital landscapes and coordinating with international counterparts to neutralize a sophisticated threat that could have destabilized critical alliances and endangered countless lives. My actions, hidden from the world, had averted a crisis of global proportions. I had faced genuine danger, made impossible decisions, and emerged victorious. Yet here I was, being silently condemned for not making my parents proud in the way they understood. The absurdity of it was almost unbearable, the chasm between my reality and their perception so vast it felt like I existed on a different planet. I forced a polite smile, nodded at the congratulations directed towards Jack, and swallowed the bitter taste of their unwavering ignorance. The day of Jack's Special Forces induction ceremony arrived, crisp and bright, a perfect backdrop for a family celebration of military achievement. I went, of course, a quiet obligation, a silent witness to the public affirmation of everything my parents held dear. I chose a seat in the back of the auditorium, hoping to blend into the sea of proud families and uniformed personnel. My civilian clothes, carefully chosen to be utterly unremarkable, were my camouflage. I wanted nothing more than to remain inconspicuous, a shadow at the periphery, observing without being observed. The less attention on me, the less chance of uncomfortable questions, or, worse, their pitying glances. My parents sat beaming in the front row, their chests puffed with pride, their eyes fixed on Jack as he stood on stage, sharp and distinguished in his new uniform. He looked exactly as a son molded by a retired Navy captain should look. The ceremony unfolded with all the solemnity and pomp expected of a military event, speeches about honor, duty, and sacrifice. Each word, meant to inspire, felt like a silent rebuke to my own hidden life, a life of duty and sacrifice that would never receive such public acknowledgement. I watched Jack, feeling a complex mix of distant admiration for his path and a profound detachment from the performance unfolding before me. It was during a brief lull, as the dignitaries shuffled into position for the next part of the program, that I felt a subtle shift in the air, a sense of being observed. My gaze, almost instinctively, flickered towards the stage, to the row of high-ranking officers and distinguished guests. And there he was, Rear Admiral Wilson. He stood a little apart from the others, his posture impeccable, his eyes scanning the crowd with an almost preternatural awareness. Admiral Wilson was not just a prominent figure in the military. He was a pivotal contact in my own clandestine world, one of the very few individuals who knew my true identity, my actual rank, and the nature of my work. We had met on numerous occasions in secure facilities, discussing operations that would make the hair on the back of any civilian's neck stand on end. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, met mine across the expanse of the auditorium. There was no flicker of surprise, no overt recognition that would betray my cover. Just a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, a brief dip of his head that acknowledged my presence, my true status, in a way no one else in that room could. It was a silent, powerful validation, a stark contrast to the dismissive glances of my own family. In that single, fleeting moment, surrounded by the public celebration of my brother's nascent military career, I felt truly seen, not as Samantha the failure, but as Colonel Samantha, the woman who operated in the shadows, saving lives, a discipline and dedication that only a select few understood. The acknowledgement was brief, yet it resonated deeply, a quiet affirmation in the midst of my family's oblivious pride. The quiet acknowledgement from Admiral Wilson had been a fleeting comfort, a silent nod in a room full of polite ignorance. I had resumed my inconspicuous posture, ready to disappear into the anonymity of the crowd once the ceremony concluded. My parents and Jack were still basking in the glow of the speeches, their attention solely on the stage, oblivious to my small, internal validation. The sense of being an outsider, a secret agent in my own family's narrative, had become a familiar cloak. But then, an unexpected ripple moved through the uniformed crowd near the stage. Admiral Wilson, having finished his official duties, began to descend, not towards the nearest exit, but in a deliberate trajectory towards the back of the auditorium. Towards me. My heart gave a sudden, hard lurch in my chest. He was coming straight for me. My carefully constructed cover, years in the making, felt suddenly fragile, like a thin sheet of glass about to shatter. I braced myself, my muscles tensing, as he navigated the rows with a focused intensity that left no doubt about his destination. My parents, who had just turned to begin congratulating Jack as he stepped off the stage, were standing a mere few feet away. They were laughing, their voices bright with pride, utterly unaware of the approaching storm. Then, Admiral Wilson reached me. He stopped directly in front of me, his gaze sharp and direct, and extended a hand. His voice, strong and resonant, cut through the low hum of post-ceremony chatter, carrying clearly in the quieted auditorium. "Colonel Hayes," he stated, his voice booming with unmistakable military authority, "I didn't expect to see you here." The world seemed to tilt. My parents, who had been mid-conversation with Jack, froze. Their laughter died on their lips, their heads snapping towards the sound, their eyes wide and disbelieving as they took in the sight of a decorated rear admiral addressing me by a military rank they had never known I possessed. Their faces, moments before alight with pride, became masks of utter shock, confusion, and a dawning, terrible realization. Jack, too, stopped mid-sentence, his jaw going slack. The silence around us became deafening, drawing the attention of several nearby officers and guests. Before anyone could process the shocking revelation, another voice chimed in, equally loud and clear. It was a young, earnest-looking officer, a lieutenant commander I recognized from a recent briefing. He approached, his face alight with admiration. "Colonel Hayes," he added, looking directly at me, oblivious to the frozen tableau of my family. "Your team's work in Operation Italia was excellent. Truly textbook." Operation Italia, a highly classified mission, just weeks prior, that had averted a major intelligence disaster. The words, uttered casually by a junior officer, were a public commendation of my true identity, my true work, and my true rank, leaving absolutely no room for doubt or misinterpretation. My parents' eyes widened further, fixed on me, then on the admiral, then back on me again, their faces a canvas of disbelief, horror, and a slow, creeping understanding of the monumental lie I had been living. The meticulously built wall around my secret life had just crumbled, spectacularly and irrevocably. In the most public way imaginable, the sudden silence that had fallen over the crowd after Admiral Wilson's booming declaration and the lieutenant commander's unwitting commendation felt like the calm before a storm. All eyes, particularly those of my family, were fixed on me, wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. My mother's face was chalk white, her hand flying to her mouth. She took a hesitant step forward, her voice a reedy whisper, barely audible over the thumping of my own heart. "Samantha," she croaked, her eyes darting from me to Admiral Wilson, then back again. "What are they talking about?" The question, trembling and laced with an almost desperate plea for reassurance, hung heavy in the air. My father, typically so composed and unshakable, looked utterly shell-shocked. His brow was deeply furrowed, his mouth slightly agape, as if the words had physically stunned him. He shook his head slowly, a dismissive, almost automatic response to something that defied his carefully constructed reality. "No," he scoffed, though the sound was weak, laced with genuine disbelief. "That's impossible. Samantha dropped out of the Naval Academy. She works in insurance." His voice carried a defensive edge, a desperate attempt to cling to the narrative he had so readily accepted, the one that confirmed his prior judgments. Admiral Wilson, his expression still calm and authoritative, gently interjected, his voice carrying an unmistakable note of correction. "Begging your pardon, Captain," he stated, his gaze meeting my father's directly, "but it's the Air Force, not the Navy, and in a rank that reflects exceptional service." The Admiral's words were delivered without malice, but with an unwavering certainty that left no room for doubt. The distinction, the very branch of service, shattered another layer of my father's preconceived notions, exposing the profound depth of his ignorance about my life. Jack, who had been standing beside our parents, equally stunned, finally found his voice. It was quieter than my parents' demands, tinged with a genuine confusion that pierced through my hardened defenses. "Sam," he asked, his eyes wide and searching, is that true?" For years, he had accepted the convenient fiction, the easy narrative of my professional mediocrity. Now, faced with the undeniable reality, his voice held a raw vulnerability I hadn't heard in years. I looked at him, then at my parents, their faces a mixture of betrayal, confusion, and a dawning, terrible understanding. The time for pretense was over. The secret was out. There was no point in denying it, no point in prolonging the charade. A quiet strength settled over me, a feeling of weary resolve. "Yes," I replied simply, my voice clear and steady, devoid of the emotional turmoil raging within me. "It's true." I paused, letting the weight of that single word settle in the stunned silence of the auditorium. Then, I offered them the truth, the bare bones of it, without apology or elaboration. I was recruited from the academy directly into a secret program. The story about me dropping out was my cover. It was a concise, unvarnished explanation, stripping away years of carefully constructed lies in a few stark sentences. The gasp from my mother, the almost imperceptible tremor that ran through my father, the profound shift in Jack's expression. It was all confirmation that the truth, finally laid bare, was more shocking than any lie. The initial shock on my family's faces lingered long after Admiral Wilson and the other officer had moved on, leaving me standing in a sudden, exposed spotlight. My parents were speechless, their expressions a mix of dawning comprehension and lingering disbelief. Jack, however, was the first to speak, his voice filled with a genuine awe I hadn't heard from him in years. "Sam, a colonel? Air Force," he kept repeating, as if trying to etch the reality into his mind. Over the next few days, the phone calls were strained, filled with awkward silences and tentative questions. I explained, as much as I could without violating my oath of secrecy, that most of my work was highly classified, that the nature of my duties demanded absolute discretion. It wasn't a punishment or a rejection of them. It was a necessary sacrifice for the work I did. Slowly, painstakingly, the walls of their preconceived notions began to crack. They started to listen, truly listen, perhaps for the first time in my adult life. The real shift became apparent at our next family dinner, a gathering that felt tentative and fragile, as if everyone was walking on eggshells. We were still navigating the vast chasm of unspoken years, but something felt different. As we sat down, my father, usually so formal and reserved, cleared his throat. He turned to a distant cousin who had just asked about my office job, and a slow, proud smile spread across his face, a smile I hadn't seen directed at me since childhood. "Actually," he interjected, his voice resonating with an unfamiliar warmth and immense pride, "this is Colonel Hayes, Air Force Special Operations." The words, spoken with such conviction, felt like a powerful embrace, a public acknowledgement of my true identity, a recognition of my service that brought tears to my eyes. My mother, usually more outwardly emotional, confirmed his words with a beaming smile, then disappeared briefly. She returned carrying a small, carefully arranged display, a shadow box containing a few of the awards I had received, discreetly sent to her by my commanding officer after the Admiral's impromptu reveal. Seeing my quiet commendations, the tangible proof of my dedication, laid out for all to see, filled me with a quiet, profound sense of acceptance.